All right, it's that time again where I collect all my favorite art books from this past year, compile them into a YouTube video, and talk about why I love them so much. And just like my previous 3 videos on this topic, I will put a link below in case one of these intrigues you enough where you'd like to own a copy for yourself. Now, I'm a little more selective than I have been in the past. I think before, if it was, like a 7 out of 10 art book, I would think the more the merrier. But now I'm like, if it's not an 8 or a 9 or a 10 out of 10, well, obviously a 10 out of 10, then I'm not gonna buy it. I'm really trying to focus more on quality, and these are the ones that I believe are of quality, and I would like to share them with you all. And then as a little bonus at the end, I'm gonna talk about my 3 favorite books that I've read this past year and my 3 favorite manga. Let's just jump in. We have 16 art books I would like to get through, and I would also like to thank Josh for doing the editing, and you'll see him constantly put up the name cards for each one and who is the publisher. And if you guys have seen my previous videos, you know I like to start with my favorite of the year, and I'm gonna choose my friend Miles with his art book, Liminality. I think I'm saying that right, Liminality. If you aren't already familiar with his work, I highly recommend you go check it out. Because not only is this book phenomenal, but his art is so good. It basically combines all the technical prowess that you'd want in a draftsman with the creativity and originality that an artist can only bring. His work is deeply contemplative, and it challenges you, but not impossibly so. When I look at his work, I can sense that he was deeply intentional, and he had a concept in his head that he wanted to showcase in a very unique way. It's these abstract concepts slapped with realism fixation. You can tell he doesn't mind spending hours behind the pencil, pushing the graphite around until he's finally comfortable with the results. And I'll definitely talk about the book, but my last note on Miles is, in my eyes, he is a true artist. He doesn't seem to create with the intention just to make money or to gain social status. He really is exploring what it means to be human. He likes to explore his thoughts and emotions in a way that you can understand, and for many who follow him, it acts as a reflection for their own lives. To me, this is the type of art that we need more of in the world, and in the age of short attention spans and getting things as done and quick as possible, I like that his art forces you to sit with it, and maybe challenges you to do some introspection. I have so much respect for him and his work, and as a fellow pencil artist, he continues to inspire me. Okay, so talking about the book itself, it's rather massive. There's quite a bit in the pages of this collection, and it constantly shifts in its layout from doing full bleeds, full page spreads, and then sometimes the art will be cropped and there will be a lot of zoomed in areas that you get to check out the detail work that he has done. And for a lot of the spreads in the book, he'll have the final piece on one side and then the preliminary sketch or his thoughts about the art on the other side. And while the book does have a lot of his graphite work, it also showcases his ink work and his paintings. And then as a fun little addition, in the middle he included a mini sketchbook of drawings that were abandoned, and he calls it Orphans. I always think it's kind of neat when an art book has a fun little surprise like that, and I'm seeing more and more of that in the newer books that are being published today. I think in a sense it almost makes the books more interactive for the reader. Which, speaking of, this is one of the few art books I actually read from cover to cover. I really enjoyed his thoughts about the art making process and what being an artist means to him. I feel like I don't really have to explain why his art is so fascinating, and I think why he has gained such a following on social media, or even why a lot of modern artists look up to him. So instead, I'll just say I think you should get a copy for yourself, and this is definitely one of my prized possessions on my bookshelf. Oh, is it cat break? Hi, Casper. Right. Oh, don't press on that. Hi, Gabor. Alright, next up we're going to explore my favorite subject matter, which is dark fantasy, and the book is Cursed Swords, The Art of Strange House. Oop, I'm off frame. And when I say dark fantasy, I mean like dark fantasy. Like this is tiptoeing on the edge into being horror. I would almost describe the style and the art as being FromSoftian, which is basically FromSoft games from Dark Souls to Elden Ring, but it also has a little bit of the Resident Evil vibe. It's a beautiful character concept art book, and every now and then it'll surprise you with a splash of color, and in between the pages of grayscale, it's kind of a little fun surprise. Now personally, I'm a huge fan of texture, of grit, of the unknown, so when I see this type of art, I just get really excited, because to me, this is what dark fantasy is all about. The page layouts are also excellent. As I'm flipping through, I'm reminded of how much I like art books that are just the art, with almost no verbiage at all, as it almost adds this little hint of mystery hidden between the pages. It has a little bit of the sensation that you're looking at something forbidden, like a spell that you were never supposed to witness. And the other reason I love dark fantasy and what I think this artist nails is that often what is deemed as scary or gory or creepy to look at is just something natural taken to the extreme. When you think of decay or rot and then apply it onto a character, I think why it's so disturbing is because we can kind of sense how it could be real. It may be a fantastical world, but it's rooted in a reality that is known to us. And I like to give credit where credit is due, so I'll give a shout out to Deandra Pop, who introduced me to this book, and I'm so glad because this has become one of my favorites of last year. So if you're a fan of the FromSoft games, if you like dark fantasy, if you like things that go bump in the night, I feel like this is a great book for you to own. Next up, we're going to go way back into the 1800s with a master collection of Gustave Doré. So Gustave is one of the most prolific artists I've ever heard of. Even the title of the book claims that he has done over 10,000 illustrations. And what's funny is, as thick as this book is, this is only a collection of what they selected. And honestly, this is one of those artists that went for quality and quantity. And I call this a master collection because when you flip through the pages, you can just tell, not only was this an artist who had an understanding of their technical capabilities, they really understood composition, value, contrast, and they really went for it. And even though most of this book shows his black and white draftsman ability, he was also very good at sculpture work and at painting, surprisingly. But it's definitely his black and white illustrations that he's most well known for. And oh boy, these are phenomenal. He really just understood how to balance composition with value and contrast alone. And just as an added flex, he throws in some insane detail in some of his works, and some of them have multiple, and I'm talking like almost hundreds of figures in the same piece. And what's kind of funny is, as serious and ethereal as some of his artwork is, he also has a great amount of art that is very whimsical and very silly. He definitely has a lot of comic and fairy tale work that definitely is more playful. And I think one of the reasons I also am so intrigued by his work is often my art lends itself to being on the lighter side with like maybe 5 to 10% darker values in the piece, where he kind of flips it, where some of his pieces will have 90 to 95% of just a darker range, with a really well-intended lighter source being placed in that remaining 5% that really brings the whole composition together, and it brings such an atmosphere of either dread or suspense that I'm definitely intrigued by it. And the book layout is fantastic. Almost every page you turn has art from edge to edge, and when there is verbiage, it's usually explaining the time period or the separation of chapters from what type of work it is. And seeing how this is a 500-page book, you're really getting the bang for your buck on this one. If you do art yourself, there's a good chance you have probably seen his art just floating around on the dark Pinterest boards. And I think I did want to showcase just some of his paintings because I think they get underappreciated. I think his understanding of color is equally masterful, and if you can see the size of some of his paintings in real life, they're even more impressive. And for some reason, there's a painting that depicts the 9th layer of hell, and it is so captivating and eerie to me seeing just a couple ice chunks floating on this frozen lake of bodies intertwined. I just think it's fantastic, especially when you just turn a couple pages back and all of a sudden you're transported into a fairyland type scenario. And that to me really encompasses the range of what a fantasy artist is interested in. It's either like kind of macabre, spooky mystery fantasy, or it's more whimsical, lighthearted fairy fantasy. And I love seeing when an artist just plays within that entire spectrum. So I'm a big fan of this book, and I really like his work, but I think even if you aren't a character artist, if you're more interested in environment art, I actually think this is a great one to study environments from. So yeah, highly recommend. Okay, let's go a little more lighthearted and let's get more playful. We're gonna dive into The Sunroom by Beatrice Blue. And Beatrice actually had a different book that was on one of my previous lists, and that book is called Wonder, and I think it is fantastic. And this one's a little different. This one's as if the artist gave you their actual sketchbook and you were allowed to just flip through the pages. In the opening of the book, she described Sunroom as a place of play and comfort without judgment. And that's how it kind of feels, because not every page is a finished illustration. A lot of them have the rougher sketches. And she even mentions in her introduction that she included a lot of the sketches that weren't that great. And she wanted you to be able to see the full spectrum of lost art, essentially, that maybe wouldn't make it to a final full color illustration. But what I've always liked about her work is that she really plays with shape language, and it always has this sense of inner joy. I always feel like she's having fun making the art, and I think that's why it's so nice to look through. Sometimes I take art so seriously, and it's nice to see an artist who just seems to be having a good time making the art itself. And I'm a big believer that intention really comes through in a final piece. So when I'm looking through her work, it's that nice reminder to maybe loosen up and have a little more fun with the way you're doing your line work, or the way that you're shading it, or even the subject matter. Sometimes the best art isn't the one that has the most detail. Sometimes it's just the meaning behind the piece that has the strength to it. And flipping through these pages, you'll understand what I mean. And as you're seeing, it's kind of a mix of colored pencils and line art and paintings. I think it's gouache, I believe. And there's not really an organization to it, but that actually adds more of the charm to the book, because every page you don't know what you're going to get next. So if you're a fan of Beatrice's other books, I feel like this is a nice addition to kind of see what goes on inside of her head besides just the finished illustrations. So of course, I had to add this to my favorites of 2025. Speaking of whimsy, our next book is from an artist that also goes to a lot of conventions, and I think a lot of my friends have been very excited to receive this book after it was kickstarted, and that is Dreaming in Color by Natalie Andrewson. So if you're already familiar with Natalie's work, it's everything that you would want in a collection from her, and if you're not familiar, well, let's just say it's a very fun, playful, inviting landscape. And a lot of the times when you're looking at her work, you're kind of inventing little stories for all the little characters that you're seeing and how they interact with each other. It's really just a joy to get lost in her world. What I wasn't expecting is it has such an in-depth tutorial about riso printing. And I'm not that familiar with this style of printing, so the fact that she really goes in depth of how it works, what it is, what colors that you can choose from, how they overlap. There's even a section that has this clear vellum paper where it shows layer by layer what each color does. And then throughout the book, she's constantly explaining what colors are being used in that piece or how the different colors interacted with one another. And every so often, on the left side of her pages, she kind of does a demonstration of what the colors look like isolated. And then on the right side, it's the finished illustration with all the colors lined up perfectly. And normally, I'm not the biggest fan when there's a bunch of blank pages within an art book, but I will say, Natalie won me over by the end of this because I realized how intentional it was that on the right side of every spread would be the finished illustration, and then the left side would either be a snippet of maybe some of the elements in the piece or a little blurb about the story, or sometimes it would be the isolated colors that were used. And I came to appreciate that whenever you turn the page, you'd basically be zooming in on a different section of this world, and it would just be isolated on that. So it almost gave more gravity to each piece, and it kind of invited you to not just get through it as fast as you can. Like, you really had to enter the world every time you turn the page, and then you got to just stay there for a little while. And in a way, it kind of gave you a moment to breathe and just feel like you were a part of that world wherever it was. This book is clearly a love letter to riso printing, and I thought it would just be more of a collection of her work, but it's actually an insight into the passion of how she creates. So I thought that was a really cool, unexpected surprise, and any artist that is kind of venturing down this path, I think this is a must-have. But for me, I obviously enjoy it from a different perspective. As a graphite artist, I just enjoy the amount of passion you can see behind the work itself, and then also, I think she's really smart with how she does bordering. She often takes elements within the piece itself and then frames it in a way where, yes, it does act as a border, but it also interacts with the scene. And it reminds me a lot of the artist who did fairy tale art from years back. And it's funny, if you look to the back of this book, she has an inspiration page, and a lot of those artists are mentioned. So it's really neat when you can see the influences being interpreted and kind of brought into the modern art world through a unique style. So yeah, as you can tell just flipping through the pages, her work is bold, it's confident, it's playful, and it's just something that is a fun pick-me-up whenever I need to kind of explore whimsy again. So overall, this is a very solid collection and kind of a nice surprise getting informed on how riso printing works. And I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but at least I know how it works. and I would definitely recommend it. And if you see her at a convention, I would look through her prints because I feel like there's even more than what was in this book, and I think her art is just amazing, and it's fun little reminders when you have them on the wall to be more playful and be more present within your work. Okay, so this next one's a bit odd, but bear with me. It has a reason for being on this list, and I'll explain it, but it is exotic fruits and nuts from around the world. So maybe you're thinking, Timothy, why are you including this in your art book collection review? I genuinely love books like this. I love having isolated references on a white neutral background, and I like using them over Google. And there's a couple of reasons. The main one is less screen time, obvious, but two, with so much AI floating around, it's actually nice to see high quality, kind of macro shot photography of subject matter that is from life. And for me, something as simple as a nutshell or a dried fruit can easily turn into a fantastical creature or character with just a little bit of imagination. So yes, while this is a very unique book to have on the list, I know there's other people watching this that are also kind of intrigued by this style of referencing art books. And this one could easily take like any one of these pages, turn it into like a little dirt kid creature. Or maybe some of these would turn into hats that the little critters would wear. But the other reason I wanted to include this one is because the story behind it was kind of fun. Basically, when we went to Japan with our friends Dustin and Sang last year, we went to Ghibli Park and we actually stumbled upon a secret bookstore that the entrance was kind of hidden and on the second floor of this area called the Valley of Witches. And to me, finding a secret bookstore was like gold in itself. But then the books that they sold were only things that witches would be interested in. And I was on a time crunch. They only gave me like 10 minutes to look around, so I was kind of devastated. But I did at least get the experience, and I'm hoping to one day go back so I can actually give it the time it deserves to look through the books. And hopefully I can find more than just a nut book. So even though I really do enjoy this book, I know that this won't be for everyone, so I'm including it on the list. And speaking of Studio Ghibli, the next book is actually of Miyazaki's newest film, and I know a lot of artists kind of collect the Ghibli books, but this one I did not own yet, and this is The Art of the Boy and the Heron. So talking to our friends and seeing the reception online, I feel like this film is kind of divisive. You either thought it was this random collection of events, or you absolutely loved it. I'm on the side of the team of people that absolutely loved it. And I remember talking to some of our art friends how they really wanted to enjoy it, but they just didn't get it. And I remember telling them, don't try to be too literal. I think this film is supposed to be kind of interpretable and vague on purpose. So instead of trying to piece together what everything means, instead just enjoy the ride. Maybe I'm a little biased and I like to lean into these more interpretable films. I'm sure if Josh shows some of my favorites on screen, you'll kind of see the type of movies I'm into. And I like where the intention that the director has doesn't have to be as spoon-fed and kind of allows the viewer to play in their own interpretations of what they're seeing. And they might come out with a different conclusion or what that film meant to them by the end. And to me, that is an experience that I absolutely love and I cherish, and I feel like we don't see that as often. And I know this isn't a film review, so I'll talk about the art book itself, but I definitely loved it. Now, whether or not you enjoyed the movie, when it comes to this art book, I would say it kind of stands out on its own, specifically for all the hand-painted environments. These are gorgeous. I think part of the reason I enjoyed the film so much was because of the art and because of the way that the backgrounds were constantly a breath of fresh air as you're watching it. Nowadays, so much of the animated movies are just flashy and over colorful and kind of just bombarding you constantly. And this to me was like the perfect balance of being rooted and grounded and yet still being beautiful and decadent. So who knows, maybe I'm a little biased because I'm kind of tired of all the oversaturation and the vignettes everywhere in films nowadays. And I love just seeing an edge to edge painted backdrop and characters interacting in the scene. And this book really does highlight the artistry that went behind all the scenes, all the kind of concept art that went into not only the environments, but the characters. And if you already own one of the Art of Ghibli books, you kind of already know what to expect from this one. If you like their previous art books, you're probably gonna like this one. If you don't like their previous art books, you're probably not gonna like this one. I know for myself and a lot of my art friends, it's become kind of a running joke that every artist has the Ghibli collection in their personal library, and I am part of that cliche. So here we are, and I finished the collection. As I mentioned before, we went to Ghibli Park with our friends Dustin and Sang. Dustin being the most famous art YouTuber there is, he loves when I say that, and Sang honestly being one of the more underrated artists in the convention scene, and I'm excited to showcase her book today, and that is That One Place, and it is a very special collection of her work. So the art in her book is definitely reflective of her personality. It's more soft-spoken, the palettes are a bit muted, but what's also showcased is Sang's actually very funny. And you see that throughout the book in some of the puns, especially in the later half of the book. I feel like the first half she was still exploring and it feels like her post-college days. And then as she becomes more comfortable with her direction, you see her taking more strides and more definitive directions on where she wants to go. The other kind of funny thing about the book, and I don't know if she's fully aware of this yet, every page has either a soft blue or a soft pink somewhere in the composition. You could have almost named the book Cotton Candy Hues. On a more serious note, I love the little blurbs that Sang included throughout the book talking about growing up in Vietnam, and a lot of the environments, a lot of the scenes that you see are directly influenced from her childhood, and it's really cool to see this slice of life that I didn't know about Sang before. And it was kind of this nice reminder that as people, we have these small little fragments in our memory that really mean a lot to us. And it could be an item, it could be a place. And I feel like Sang did a good job at kind of showing some of that in her art. And just like some of the earlier books I showed, you can see a lot of the playfulness that Sang has with her art. And knowing her, there's always something that she tries to zone in on, and that's, is it cute? And usually, if it doesn't pass that threshold, then it doesn't go past. And I feel like she does a really great job at figuring out what to her is cute and how to display that either in a isolated item or in an isometric grid. And then something that's unique about her book, and mind you, I'm actually not the biggest fan of this, but I understand why she did this. The spine is actually a lay flat spine, which means anywhere in the book that you flip it open, you can lay it completely flat. But what that also means is when you put it on the bookshelf, there is no wording and there is no spine. So this decision was, one, to be unique, but two, it would be for those who enjoy it just having a perfect spread where nothing is hidden by the curvature of the page and the spine. And I feel like this is especially beneficial for those who do landscape paintings, and because she has a lot of environments, it makes sense why she would have done this. And to me, this is really a benchmark into the start of her journey, and I'm very excited to see where she goes from here and what the next book will look like, and if she throws even more of her humor into it. So great book, Sang, love ya, can't wait to be neighbors. The next 4 books on this list, I joke, are 4 slices of the pie because they're all from the publisher Pie, and the first one is Entei Ryu with his book Chimera. And his works are pretty unique. It's a collection of 3D models, some painterly techniques used on those models, some filters, sometimes it's pencil sketches, sometimes it's digital paintings. And with all of his 3D models, he does different angles of each piece, so you kind of get to see the same illustration or the same character from different angles. And obviously that's not something you normally get to see unless if you're looking at a concept art book for a video game and you see the turnarounds. And this reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from my friend Corey Godby, and he says to take any idea and look at it like a prism, view it from every angle. And I love that idea that you might have a really good idea in your head, but unless if you create a good composition to frame it, it might fall apart. And I think about that with my own art because sometimes I'll just attack it and jump into an idea, but there have been many times where I think if I would have thumbnailed more and created different shots of that idea, I think I could have ended with a stronger piece overall. So this book is kind of a fun reminder of that. While there's a lot to appreciate in the creativity and the strangeness, I actually really love that the hair looks like sculpted clay. I don't know why that specifically catches my eye, but I definitely am drawn to it as I'm flipping through the pages. And of course, I'm drawn to other things that he includes. Like I love ornamentation, I love decorative detail. I kind of love when things are just floating around the character. and this book certainly has a lot of that. And there is a range to the subject matter. It's not just all ethereal goddesses and gods. There's even a chapter in the middle where it's a bunch of these punky rebel kids wearing animal heads, and it just shows another area of interest. And then in the back, he includes a mini sketchbook area where it's just his pencil drawings and thumbnails and sketches. I obviously love this, but it also just showcases his fluidity with his line control and how he adds value. You can tell he's fast, but not messy, and there is a distinction. I think this book also serves as a reminder that, let's say you want to make your own comic or manga, I think having 3D models of all your characters can help you then pose them if you need a more difficult pose for a panel you're working on, and to have that reference on standby is a great tool to have. So who knows, maybe I'll do that with my own characters when I start writing it. And clocking in at over 300 pages, this is another hefty book. And it's kind of fun because every time you look through it, you can usually find something that maybe you didn't notice before. So yeah, I really enjoy this one. Taking a stranger turn with our next book, we have Gedoku, the Art of Sakiyama. And this one I find really fascinating, but I'm also into the more unique, weird books. So I don't know if this will be for everyone, but I definitely want to showcase it. So yes, flipping through the pages, you can see that there is anime influence, but the style is pretty distinctive, I would argue. And the way that they use hatching creates this very worn, almost unnerving texture to everything. In flipping through this book, there's obviously a bunch of little narratives and mini stories that are kind of interpretable, and then other times, because I can't read Japanese, you have to piece the clues together on what the story is, and I find this fascinating. From what I can pick up, he definitely explores paranormal death mixed with flora. Seems like a strange combination, but this artist knows how to balance the two. And because they use bold, solid flats as their colors for most of the book, it creates this very eerie undertone that sticks with you as you're flipping through. I also like how there's 2 points within the book where the pages fold out into spreads, and one of them seems to be a layout of all the characters within the book, while the other one seems like a poster that you can then take out and put on your wall. And I think we're going to see that a lot in future art books, where they change up the format and they include certain things. I already bought one for next year's review where they have bookmarks that you can tear out, they have postcards, and I wouldn't be surprised if that trend continues to circulate within the art community. So if this style and subject matter speak to you, I would definitely check this one out. Next up, we have Embroidery, the Art of Yoshioka. And this one I really enjoyed because even though it's digital painting, they kind of capture their style in a way that's undefined by a specific medium. Like, it doesn't quite look like watercolor, it doesn't quite look like oil or gouache, and it doesn't quite fully look like digital either. It's in the way that they use lighting. So in between the lights and the shadows where they meet is the Terminator line, and I feel like they're really smart on capturing not only a good separation of the two, but the colors that are used in the areas of light and the areas in the shadow complement each other very well. You'll see what I mean as we're flipping through the pages. It just has a presence that seems all its own. To me, this is another great example of elevated anime. It's fascinating with the color choices, and the way that it's blended lends itself to not look too simple. And I think where some digital artists miss the mark for me is when the brushes become too obvious and it looks more careless than intentional, while here the whole scene has a nice polish to it, even though it's not rendered realistically. After years of doing these book reviews, I can tell some of you are impartial to this next section, but then some of you love this. So in the back, there's a pretty lengthy tutorial and explanation section, and they go over how they created the cover for this book. I personally enjoy seeing these, and I feel like, especially in the world we live in now with AI, I feel like artists are having to prove their process more and more. So this is another thing I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing this in a lot more art books moving forward. The layout is also fantastic. I'm a big fan of when the art is from edge to edge and there's minimal text. And besides the chapter separations, it is just that. So big fan of how this book was designed. So if you enjoy this art style where it has kind of a meditative fantasy quality, it's not quite slice of life and it's not quite full-fledged fantasy, it's somewhere in the middle, then this art book might be worth checking out. So for the last slice of this pie, we have a book that I almost didn't include, but I'm glad I did. It's Welcome to the Peculiar Antique Shop, and this is the Art of Makura Kurama. So this book was at an anime con that we had a booth at, and I walked back to it 3 separate times because I couldn't decide if I wanted it or not. But it kept piquing my curiosity, and in the end, that's the reason I bought it. I realized its little oddities and the little strangeness that it included throughout the pages was the reason I was so interested in it. There's such small moments of intrigue or unusual concepts that I found myself more amused the more I would look through it. And the execution of the art almost has like a slightly conceptual feel to it, almost as if it's concept art for a horror game of some kind, but not like a gory horror. Think more like eerie or paranormal horror, kind of like Rule of Rose. For the formatting of the book, it's separated into different chapters that isolate on either a specific character or an object, and then that story unfolds itself over the next few spreads, usually starting with a short manga, then ending with more illustrations, or with isolated elements that would be within that scene or in that environment. And it really holds up to the book's namesake, because all of the things in this book feel like they would be part of an antique shop that is full of oddities and curiosities. And actually, now that we're doing a bunch of the actual oddity and curiosity shows, this book feels like it exemplifies a lot of what is there. It's usually a bunch of art and things that make you go, huh, that's strange. And maybe that's the exact feeling that the artist wanted you to feel while looking through this book. And I think that's what won me over. It's these little spots of creativity, these very strange, unique elements that made me second guess what I'm even looking at. So this is definitely more for a specific crowd. This won't be everyone's cup of tea. It's like a very bleak Earl Grey with like a lemon slice on the side. But then when you look closely at the seeds are made out of skulls. So if that sounds appealing to you, then this might just be the book to add to your collection. So this next book I got at a fantasy workshop that I was mentoring at last summer. And this one was geared more towards fans of Magic the Gathering and those who wanted to paint in that style. And this is one of the more well-known artists in that scene, and this is The Art of Tyler Jacobson. So this book is a gorgeous collection of a lot of the work he's done for Magic, a lot of the other freelance jobs that he has, and a couple personal works thrown throughout as well. And I'm not one of those artists who looks down upon commercial work. Heck, most of what I was inspired by when I was in college was the character concept splashes for League of Legends. If anything, they have more pressure to have a masterful understanding of composition and making sure their work reads in the values that they're placing so that it could be read in an instant for whoever the viewer is. And especially in that week, I learned because most Magic cards are seen at such a small scale, you have to be really smart with how you're placing your composition, as well as being creative with the character concept themselves and the way that it's lit. And Tyler has a great understanding of this. And it became very evident to me even before I knew that he started as an oil painter, that he treats his digital work very painterly. The brush strokes always feel very directional, and the blending doesn't feel muddy. He really has a beautiful understanding of values, and that's especially seen in his grayscale work. But when he does color, he is a great example of using the 60-30-10 rule. So in these examples, you can see how there's a dominant color, a mid-tone color, and then a color that's just a little pop, a little accent to bring it all together. And oftentimes that 10% color is usually where he wants to direct the eye. So it's a little art trick that when used correctly, you can easily bring the viewer's attention to where you want it. And especially for the Magic illustrations, this is extremely useful for your piece to be legible at that size. But speaking of the grayscale stuff, he also has a section near the back of his pencil work and some of the digital comps he does. And this is another great example of an artist who's fast, but they're not messy. His underdrawings are quick, but they're confident. And I feel like this is one of the easiest recommendations I can give for those who are interested in pursuing this path. I think there's a lot to be learned, even just from flipping through the pages and observing how he tackled the assignment. And this kind of lays the groundwork as inspiration for how you would go about it. So even if you're not a fan of Magic the Gathering, if you're a fan of fantasy art in general, I think this is a really good staple because this is like fantasy at its core. So yeah, great book, and it was awesome meeting you, Tyler. Oh yeah, also, Tyler has done a piece for Magic where it is this massive battle scene. I'll have Josh pull up on screen. And they basically had to zoom in to capture all the different sections of where the cards art would be. But I thought this was like one of those magnum opus pieces that, he even mentioned it, I don't think he's gonna do one of these ever again, but it is very impressive when you see it all together. Okay, so this next book on the list is basically a love letter to Halloween, and even though it is one of the smaller art books I have on the list, it still packs quite a punch, and that is The Art of, let me not cover the head, The Art of Austin Pardun. And I really do mean it when I say this is a love letter to Halloween, and I would say specifically even 80s and 90s aesthetic Halloween. It's everything you would want from this type of book, filled edge to edge with ghosts and pumpkins, witches, jack-o'-lanterns, black cats, Frankensteins, owls, you name it, it is in this book. And a lot of the works have this almost aged, dusty, and vintage kind of sensibility to it. And I really love this faux magazine cutout coupon, because I can remember seeing things like this when I was a kid. And it just takes you back to that warm feeling that Halloween, well, maybe not for everyone, but for me, it definitely gave a warm feeling when I thought about Halloween each year. His style is very playful, and it definitely has a lot of comic and graphic design elements. And just like Tyler, he also is very smart with his color comps. You'll see once again the 60-30-10 rule, alongside sticking with very limited palettes, which will create an overall mood, which then lends itself to making it its own brand. And in terms of art book layouts, you already know, I love the edge-to-edge art. It has literally no words, besides the words within the art, and the very first page reiterating the name of the book. I think this one's gonna be very simple for a lot of people. If you love Halloween, this might be a great one to add to your collection. This next book is pretty interesting, and this one kind of stood out amongst the other ones, but it's definitely a different type of art book. Rather than it just being a collection of work from a single artist or from a video game or from a film, this is a collection of some of the most famous paintings and the artists who painted them over the years. And this one is called Great Art Explained. And something I noticed when I got the book is it has this sticker that says as seen on YouTube. So I went to go check it out, and I didn't realize this is actually a really big channel, and they do individual videos about each art piece, and they really go in depth about each one. I think a good way to sum it up is, even in the introduction, they say, knowing what we know about Van Gogh's life doesn't make Starry Night a better painting, but it does make it more interesting. And I think that statement alone will tell you whether or not you want a book like this for yourself. And in this book specifically, they go over 30 artists and the 30 pieces that made them famous. So they give a lot of facts about who the artist was, where they were born, but more importantly, that artist's path and how it led to them being the artist that is well known today. What I enjoyed the most from this book is seeing a lot of the other paintings from each artist that maybe are not as well known, because this gave a little more insight as to what else they were interested in. And oftentimes you'd be surprised by, oh, I didn't realize this artist was also an amazing sculptor. And I think the other thing that stood out to me is it's kind of a book on style, and each chapter, even though it's meant to showcase that famous piece that they're known for, I actually think each chapter is a great deep dive into how an artist's style can be so unique and authentic, which makes it stand out amongst what else was being created by the contemporaries at the time. And even just by mentioning their name, if you know art history to any degree, you'll probably know the difference in the painting styles between Da Vinci, Picasso, and Van Gogh. And for that aspect alone, I think this is a very fascinating book to just flip through and see all the greats from yesteryear. So officially, we made it to the last art book on my favorites of 2025 list. And even then, it's not technically an art book, and you'll see what I mean in a second, but I wanted to include it because I'm so moved by the art within this that I wanted to include it. And that is Aggie and the Ghost by Matthew Forsyth. But honestly, it's really any book by Matthew Forsyth. This just happens to be the newest one. And let's check out the inner pages to understand why I included a children's book in this list. So even though I'm primarily a graphite artist who mostly works in black and white and grayscale, I am mesmerized by an artist that can use color masterfully. And when I flip through these pages, I absolutely love what he does. He is one of those artists that can do a rainbow of colors, and yet it doesn't look like Skittle rainbow vomit. It also acts as a reminder about the power of simple shapes. You don't always need to have this extravagant detail and kind of complicated, noisy compositions. There's a strength in just pulling back and stripping it down to its bare basics. A lot of his art reminds me of the colored pencils you'd have when you were younger, where they were a blended mix of a bunch of colors, and as you were drawing, it would change between yellow and blue and green. You know, even your line art wouldn't be the same color. And this feels like it's the elevated, mature version of that. And I think this also goes to show how colors can create an overall mood. There's a vibe that each of his books have, and even though it uses a spectrum kind of the full color range, they still stand out amongst each other. And because there was a strong point in my life where I thought I was going to be a children's book illustrator, I would often go to this section and browse through what was being created. And oftentimes, I genuinely think some of the best art were in the children's book section. My only nitpick is I don't really care for the story much at all, but I love his style so much, and I did enjoy his previous books, so I'm going to chalk up the story as like a fun experiment and still appreciate it for the artistry that it is. Also, I feel like the bookends could easily double as a sticker sheet, and for those watching who also want to make sticker sheets, this is a great example of what I think a successful sticker sheet would look like. Okay, so while those are my favorite art books of 2025, I'm going to do a quick change and briefly talk about my 3 favorite manga from last year and my 3 favorite level up books. So when it comes to reading manga, I'm relatively new to this world. I grew up watching the Ghibli films, and I had anime a part of my life to some degree, but for some reason I never read the manga. And I've been showing at these anime cons for over 10 years at this point, and yet I never picked one up. And that all changed about 4 years ago. We were at a show in Atlanta where I had 3 customers tell me back to back to back that my art reminded them of this specific series, and that it was also comparable to FromSoft games. Now at the time, I was just freshly introduced to Elden Ring by Josh, and I kind of fell in love with it. So I was like, I'm gonna give it a chance. I went, bought it at that show, brought it back behind the booth, read it there, and now I can happily say this is now one of my favorite series, and that is Berserk. Now honestly, this is not a book I would recommend lightly. It is not meant for a younger audience. Its themes are very mature and dark and kind of intense. So I will say if you're not into bloody dark fantasy with very dark themes, then this might not be the one for you. And when I talk about the mangas, I'll avoid spoilers or talking too much about the story because this is not a recap review, but instead I'll talk about the art, why I love it, and why I would recommend it. So within the pages of Berserk, there's a lot of texture and a lot of grit. 2 things that I love in art, and especially in a dark fantasy setting. I can actually see why so many people say that the FromSoft game developers were directly inspired by these Berserk books, and some of the monsters and boss designs feel directly ripped from the pages. Kentaro has a really good grasp on perspective and creating action scenes that feel very alive, and he really is a glutton for metal armor, for very rich battle scenes, and for kind of strange perspectives or shots, and the compositions that he creates are visually interesting. I will say the first volume is his weakest in terms of his art and execution, but as you go through the books, it only becomes stronger. And what I really like is he kind of seems a little more immature with the first volume in the way he's writing the story and who the main character Guts is and what his ambitions are. And then as he grows up as a man in real life, you can tell the main character kind of grows up with him. Guts goes from a rash, impulsive, kind of selfish and borderline loner wolf archetype to someone with integrity who is fighting for something he believes in that is greater than himself. And oh boy, not only does he mature as a person, but the art really matures, even in just the second volume on, and he is not one to shy away from detail. There are a lot of scenes where he could easily imply things happening in the background or characters in the scene, but even down to the suits of armor they're wearing or the buckles or the buttons on their jackets, he will individually detail every single one. And with everything art related, I'm always searching for the passion that goes into the work itself. And with Berserk, it not only feels like his passion, but his soul is present within the pages. It feels like blood, sweat, and tears are all mixed into the work itself. Now, unfortunately, the artist has passed. They're going to carry on his legacy through finishing the series, and Berserk is one that I deeply cherish. So if you enjoy a good dark fantasy with very graphic, natured battle scenes and tones, a fun friendship that kind of borders on more than a friendship, a really great golden arc that you'll definitely be hearing if you ask anyone about Berserk that has read it, and honestly, I'm very curious to see how the series ends. So a big thanks to not only Berserk, but Witch Hat Atelier for kind of opening the doors of this world. And since then, I've explored a lot of manga that now Josh and I read very often, and these next 2 are a product of just that. So next up on the list, we have #DRCL by Shinichi Sakamoto. Now, this one's interesting because it's a retelling of Dracula, but it's a very strange retelling. The first few chapters are pretty in line with the original story, but then it really veers into different directions. And some people might really enjoy how bizarre and unique it is, and others I think will be turned off by it. But regardless of how you feel about the story, I think the art is some of the best I have ever seen in a manga layout ever before. There are some pages in these books that I am genuinely taken aback by how much craft and effort and beautiful uniqueness that is on full display in these spreads. And for that alone, this is easy to recommend, because it almost creeps over the line of being an actual art book, just in story format. And I'm gonna do my best to share some of the most beautiful shots without spoiling anything, but just know almost every page has this level of care and detail put into the work. And yes, this is another dark fantasy that has a lot of grit and texture, but the difference between this and Berserk is there's a lot of contrast in its overarching shapes and values. There's a softness and a delicateness that isn't present in Berserk. And its main difference is this is very much a horror manga. There are some visuals that are deeply unsettling, and ones that will just stick with you for a while. And I'm sure we're doing a flip through at this point, and you can just see, it is crazy how much effort is put into these pages. And I honestly had a little bit of a excited kid moment because Shinichi followed me on Instagram, and I had that kind of starstruck moment. I'm just grateful to be alive in the same time I'm watching you create in real time. I think its only drawback are the themes are pretty bizarre, and I think for some they're a little too much in one direction. So I won't comment on that, but I will say, if you clicked on this video just looking for art book recommendations, I almost could just recommend this as an art book without even actually reading the story itself. I'm definitely a fan, and there's a lot of pages that I already have saved for referencing and for just inspiration. In kind of a very specific note, I'll say, I really love the way he draws lips and eyes. There's a softness in the little hatching marks he does and where the highlights land that really make his character designs feel very unique and all his own. And I'm always going to be a fan of an artist who sees where the bar is and thinks, you know what, I'm going to go past that bar. You know what, no, I'm going to double what's expected, and then I'm going to throw a maximalist detail on top of it just to kind of flex. So I love his art, I love his style, and I'll definitely be checking out his other series in the near future. And the last one on this list is more of a fun horror. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I swear I read more than just dark fantasy and horror manga. Josh, can you pull up some of the other ones that we've read over the last 2-3 years? I swear I read more than just one genre. It just happened that my 3 favorites from 2025 were all kind of a dark fantasy horror. So this one Josh actually found while we were at Anime NYC as it was making its debut, and that is The Summer Hikaru Died. And what was funny is he read it first behind the booth, and then he loved it so much he went to get the second copy. And after he read that one, we had to wait because there were only 2 out at the time. And he's like, Tim, you have to read these. I can't really say why, but I promise you'll like them. And oh boy, did I ever. The art itself is probably more in line what you would expect from a normal manga. And there's definitely moments of fun detail and pages that are more interesting. But the story is so captivating, and there are a few select moments that are so distinguishable, but they are lovely. They are also kind of unnerving, and I thought they were really powerful. The artist does a really great job at building up a mixture of dread, anticipation, excitement, and tension, and it keeps building up throughout the chapters, and then it explodes in a fun way, and then it kind of tumbles back into slice of life. It can get into more casual hangouts, and then the horror kind of creeps up, and then it really sends a shiver down your spine. And that rinse, wash, repeat cycle is actually really fun to experience. And I think where this manga really shines is when it taps into the more supernatural elements and the kind of unnerving but likable friendship that the 2 main characters have. So yeah, if that premise sounds interesting to you, I would definitely check this one out. Now, if it seems like there's enough interest, I could do a compilation video each year of the manga that I've read, because I've definitely read more than just these 3 series, and I've already started a couple new ones that I'm pretty excited about. So if any of you are out there that actually read manga and possibly could recommend ones that are kind of in this vein, or ones that you would think I would like, I would love to hear it. Because I actually do read the comments on these videos, and I will actually go to the bookstore and check these out. And who knows, maybe the one that you recommend will actually be on next year's list. Alright, and that leads us to the final segment of this video where I want to talk about my 3 favorite life level up books, or commonly considered self-help books, as I genuinely think these are incredibly helpful and I really love reading these. It's a way for me to feel like I'm gamifying my life outside of my career and what I draw, and it definitely feels like I gained attributes like you would in a video game, and some of them are more like mental fortitude, or self-confidence, or understanding other people's emotions. And since 2023, I've read about 6-ish books per year, and each of these feel like whenever I have an obstacle that I'm presently facing, there's always a book for that. It definitely makes it feel like you're less alone in this world, knowing that any problem that you are experiencing, there's someone else that not only has gone through it, but has written a guide on how to push through. So even though I would love to ramble about all the books that I read, I'm going to narrow it down to just the 3. So for the first one, this has since become possibly my favorite book in this category, and I have recommended this to so many people, and it seems to touch people in a positive way, and that is The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. So Mel has been someone I've seen in random little clips that get stitched together on YouTube or Instagram, and they're always inspiring quotes or talking about work and motivation. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to take a chance on this one, and I could not have found this book at a better time in my life. It literally was a de-stressor. It has improved the relationships in my personal life with my friendships. And overall, I think there's just a lot of golden nuggets of wisdom throughout that anyone could walk away with gaining something. In a way, it almost feels like this is a guidebook on how to live a happier adult life. And it kind of helps you understand why a lot of us get stressed, where our need for control comes from, and how when that need for control gets pushed onto other people, it creates a lot of stress and anxiety in our own lives. So the first part of the book talks about motivation and self-discipline and basically your relationship with yourself. And then the rest of the book is basically understanding your relationship with other people. And she really explains that we as humans want control in our lives, and when we try to control other people, it creates stress and anxiety, and it often affects the relationship we have with that other person in a negative way. And what I liked about this book is it kind of helps you pull back and understand that you have to let them act in the way that they behave. You can try to mentor them or give them advice, but in the end, they're gonna do what they want, and you have to be okay with that. And the book doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths. Like, the one I found interesting was that everyone's going to have negative opinions and thoughts about you, even the people that you love. And then the people that maybe don't care for you as much will really try to push a narrative about you, and you have to be okay with that. And we want to resist, we want to defend our name. And the idea is that you just have to let them express their feelings and not to take it personally. Because if you're confident and happy with the person that you are, those words will have no effect on you. You're always going to be stronger than someone's opinion of you. And there's this one chapter that I really like where it's talking about loving difficult people. And that could be the friends you have or even people in your family. And often these are the people that when they're feeling disgruntled or when they're feeling that everything's going wrong in the world, they'll want to pull you down with them, and they want you to kind of commiserate. And if you refuse, it'll create friction. But just as you allow them to live their lives and what they choose to interact and consume, they also have to be okay with what you're choosing. And people will always have a reason why you should feel the way that they do. And just remember, you have control over whether or not you agree with it. And even if they have good intentions, in the end, they're trying to control you and they're trying to control your emotions, which is not okay. And if things ever go sour or escalates, you have the ability to step back and realize that people can only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves. It's one of those cheesy quotes you hear a lot, but it really is true. And the last thing I'll say about this book that I took away is that it really made me understand that everyone has a different frame of reference for everything. So whenever I disagree or I'm frustrated with someone, I try to pause, take a step back, try to put myself in their perspective, in their shoes, and understand their point of view. And usually this will help me see why they're feeling a certain way and just let it go. And the book even talks about how a lot of us are kids who grew up into adult bodies, and a lot of us still though react with kid emotions. And it becomes very apparent the older you get what that looks like and when to engage and when to pull away. So I could go on, but I think I'm gonna stop there. I'm just gonna say I highly recommend this, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. This next one is more specific for artists, and I hands down think this is the best book for artists. I think every artist should read it, and that is called The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. And I know some artists out there are intimidated by how thick this book looks. I believe it's like 400 pages. Yeah, 404. I promise he knows his demographic. Most chapters are 3 pages long. He writes it so that you can either read a giant chunk of it or just little slivers and still get something out of it in that short amount of time. So even if you're an artist who doesn't consider themselves a reader, I think this is the one that you should make an exception for. It literally feels like he puts into words the thoughts and the experiences that most artists and creative people go through on a daily basis. And he covers the whole journey from the conception idea phase to what it's like actually working on your concept, and then what to do with it once it's done. So as an example, he has this beautiful metaphor for what collecting an idea and making that art come to life looks like in the form of a seed. So he compares it to you collect a bunch of seeds from your daily experience, and sometimes you plant it right away and sometimes you save it for later. And he does this beautiful comparison where sometimes you think a seed that looks so perfect and golden and it's symmetrical will create the most beautiful plant, but it becomes a dud. And that really ugly seed that you kind of ignored for years, when you plant that one, it becomes this beautiful willow tree. And then he talks about after you plant the seed, that you have to nurture it and you have to give it an environment for it to grow. And you can't force it to be something that it doesn't want to be. And I think about that sometimes with art where you want it to be something, but the piece itself is trying to grow in a different direction. And he does this throughout the whole book, where he talks in these really fun, wonderful metaphors and analogies that make it more interesting to read. I felt like this was very reassuring without it being pandering or without sugarcoating the harder aspects of what it means to be an artist, especially if this is your career. So if you've been feeling like you've been hitting a creative block or you need some inspiration, I definitely think this is the book you should check out. I don't think I even want to go further into what this book offers because I think it's kind of a fun journey that you get to take reading through it. So instead, I'll just say, if you feel like you're going through an art block or if you're feeling stuck right now and if you consider yourself a creative person, I think this book might help you push through that. And honestly, this book really made me feel seen in a way that a lot of other books don't. And I think being an artist and someone who, draws almost every day, it's a weird lifestyle that we live. And this book made it feel so reassuring that, yes, this is a real path that a lot of us take. And the struggles and the frustrations that we have are felt by everyone in this field. And that's why I recommend it. And the last book I have is for those who are feeling stuck currently, or you're hitting an obstacle and you're just so frustrated with it. And this book explains how you can flip that and how it's actually a good thing because the obstacle is the way. And this one is by Ryan Holiday. And it sounds contradictory, but it's not that the obstacle is the problem, but it's our approach and our attitude that is actually the problem. And this isn't one of those books that tells you to ignore your problems or just be positive. It very much addresses that there is an obstacle and that by you figuring out how to get over it, you become stronger afterwards. So you almost become thankful that there are obstacles because then it presents an opportunity for you to essentially grow stronger as a person. But it also doesn't pretend that there are some things that are very difficult and that are kind of impossible to ignore, whether it's like our health conditions or something that's going on that we have no control over. And in those cases, the book reminds us to be less reactive and short-sighted with it, but instead to focus on what you can control and persist in those efforts. And I've actually read another one of his books called Ego is the Enemy. And what I like about Ryan is he considers himself a Stoic and he very much believes in that philosophy. And I'm a really big fan of Stoicism, and I read this other book a couple years ago called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And even though it was written 2,000 years ago, it is very relatable and it very much shows how to have a level head, especially in dire situations. And this was written basically as a journal by a Roman emperor who had so much power at that time, and yet his thoughts are so insightful, and you can tell he really cared about the people around him. As an example, one of my favorite parts is he lists everyone in his life, and he writes down the characteristics that he looks up to most in that person. And I think that's such a cool exercise for anyone to do, to even be a little more grateful for the people in their life and what they gain from them. And I bring that up because Ryan is a huge fan of Marcus, and you see it being quoted all the time in his books. And that's why if you read one, you'll probably be interested in the others. And I just really enjoyed this one because I was going through a pretty weird art hurdle that I couldn't seem to overcome. And I feel like this one helped push through that. So this is another one kind of like the Creative Act, but this one's even more specific if you're struggling at this very moment with an art block or an art hurdle. Maybe this is the one you should check out. So thank you all for letting me talk about my favorite books of 2025. And I will say, I did release my own art book, so if you're interested in pencil art, this is basically everything I've drawn. I posted way more of it in the last art book review, but I'll share some slides of it here. But basically, if you're interested in fantasy art, whether it's whimsical, macabre, decadent, sometimes ethereal, those are definitely the playgrounds I like to explore the most with my art. I'm definitely a maximalist. I love adding detail. I love adding little meanings everywhere. So like I mentioned, if you want to see a more in-depth look at the pages within this book, it's in my last art book review at the very end. And I will say, if you enjoy pencil art, I hope that this would be one you would want to add to your collection. So thank you all again, and hopefully I'll make some other videos before next year's art book review. But I am now streaming on Twitch 3 times a week, and I'll put a link to that below. And hopefully there's some new books that you can add to your collection. Take care.